Hello, everybody. Before we begin today's video, I would like to make a few quick statements. Now, before we begin this video, I would like to say Happy 4th of July, everybody. Happy 4th of July for those who celebrate it. Now, um, in order to celebrate America's 250th year anniversary of independence, I would like to read Wikipedia's page on the US Declaration of Independence before we begin, particularly the first paragraph or so, which gives a decent short and sweet summarization on the US Declaration of Independence. And now let's begin. The Declaration of Independence, headed The Unanimous Declaration of the 13 United States of America on the original signed document, is the founding document of the United States. On July 4th, 1776, it was adopted unanimously by the Second Continental Congress. The Second Continental Congress, who were convened at the Pennsylvania State House, later renamed Independence Hall in Philadelphia. These delegates became known as the nation's founding fathers. The Declaration explains why the 13 colonies regarded themselves as independent sovereign states, no longer subject to British colonial rule, and has become one of the most circulated, reprinted, and influential documents in history. The American Revolutionary War commenced in April 1775 with the battles of Lexington and Concord. Amid the growing tensions, delegates of the several colonies reconvened the Continental Congress on May 10th at Philadelphia. The British monarch, King George III, proclaimed them to be in rebellion on August 23rd, 1775. Actually, you know what? I'll just read the whole top summarization. I'll just read the whole top summarization. Actually, on June 11th, 1776, Congress appointed the Committee of Five: John Adams, Benjamin Franklin, Thomas Jefferson, Robert R. Livingston, and Roger Sherman to draft and present the Declaration. Adams, a leading proponent of independence, persuaded the committee to charge Jefferson with writing the document's original draft, which the Congress then edited. Jefferson largely wrote the Declaration between June 11th and the 28th. Wrote the Declaration between June 11th and 28th, 1776. The Declaration offered the political, moral, and legal justification for independence from the Kingdom of Great Britain. 2 days prior to the Declaration's adoption, Congress passed the Lee Resolution, which resolved that the British no longer had governing authority over the 13 colonies. The Declaration justified the independence of the colonies, citing 27 colonial grievances against the king and asserting certain natural and legal rights, including a right of revolution. The declaration was unanimously ratified on July 4th by the Second Continental Congress, whose delegates represented each of the 13 colonies. In ratifying and signing it, the delegates knew they were committing an act of high treason against the crown, which was punishable by torture and death. 2 days following its ratification, on July 6, it was published by the Pennsylvania Evening Post. The first public readings of the Declaration occurred simultaneously on July 8, 1776, at noon, and at three previously designated locations in Trenton, New Jersey, Easton, Pennsylvania, and Philadelphia. The Declaration was published in several forms. The printed Dunlap broadside was widely distributed following the Declaration signing, and two original copies are now preserved at the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C. A signed copy of the Declaration is on display at the National Archives in Washington, D.C., and is generally considered the first official document. This copy, engrossed or handwritten by Timothy Matlack, was ordered by Congress on July 19th, signed primarily on August 2nd, 1776. The Declaration had proven an influential and globally impactful statement on human rights. The Declaration was viewed by Abraham Lincoln as the moral standard to which the United States should strive, and he considered it a statement of principles through which the Constitution should be interpreted. In 1863, Lincoln made the Declaration the centerpiece of his Gettysburg Address, widely considered among the most famous speeches in American history. The Declaration's second sentence: "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all people are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness," is considered one of the most significant and famed lines in world history. Pulitzer Prize winning historian Joseph Elias had written that the Declaration contains, quote, "the most potent and consequential words in American history." Yeah. The top page of Wikipedia's page on the Declaration of Independence is it's a really it does a really fantastic job talking about the Declaration of the Declaration of Independence. It's a pretty nice, sweet, short and sweet, and pretty informative summarization on the U.S. Declaration of Independence. Um, Uh, so yeah, of course I'm definitely not reading the whole page. I'm definitely not reading the whole page at all. Definitely not. But yeah, that's a good summary. Now, the next statement I would like to make is that now that I finished reading this, is that this is going to be the last video I'm going to record on my brother's laptop. Yeah, the device that I generally recorded on was on my brother's laptop. Uh I You see, what I mean is that I'd usually just plop on my brother's bed in his bedroom and just comfortably read away at, or just record a video in general in his bedroom. And but now after this video, which would be the last video I would record on his laptop, from now on, I'm going to record on my brother's PC, which he technically loaned to me. Except he would he might use the except he probably might use the PC. Oh, okay. He would only really use the PC only if he has to do college exams, but he essentially loaned it to me, the PC, in the living room, in my family's living room. So yeah, a little congrats for me, I suppose. My brother's PC is now mine, I suppose. So a little congrats for me. A little personal congrats to me. But with but with di- but with this out of the way, let's begin with today's video, shall we? Let's begin. Let's begin. Chapter 5 Chapter 15. The Feeder of Pompey. 5 months later, the Feeder of Pompey, March 15th, 44 BCE, late morning. The Feeder of Pompey was one of the grandest monuments of the late Roman Republic, commissioned by the late General Pompey the Great. Completed in 55 BCE, it became the first permanent stone feeder ever built in Rome, breaking with centuries of tradition that had favored temporary wooden structures. Its architectural design was modeled after a Greek feeder at Mytilene on the island of Lesbos, which Pompey had admired during his eastern campaigns in 62 BCE. The feeder of Pompey dominated the surrounding districts like a mountain of pale stone rising from the crowded streets of Rome. Its immense semicircular outer wall towered over the nearby insulae, casting long afternoon shadows across the bustling avenues below. Massive arcades stretched in graceful tiers around the curved facade, each level formed by rows of evenly spaced arches supported by thick stone piers. Between many of the arches stood marble statues of victorious generals, gods, and famous Romans, their polished forms gleaming beneath the Mediterranean sun. Broad staircases climbed toward the upper entrances, where streams of citizens disappeared beneath the vaulted passageways leading into the seating above. Vendors crowded the approaches to the feeder, selling olives, bread, watered wine, roasted chestnuts, flowers, and small clay souvenirs depicting Pompey Magnus himself. Sweet. Senators, in bright white togas, mingled with merchants, soldiers, slaves, foreign traders, and travelers from every corner of the Republic, creating a constant sea of movement before the enormous structure. Unlike the later marble monuments of imperial Rome, the feeder combines pale limestone, creamy travertine, reddish brickwork, and smooth Roman concrete into a monumental but distinctly Republican appearance. Bronze fittings glimmered upon gates and railings, while colorful painted decorations survived beneath the shelter of many archways. Crimson banners Crimson banners flutter gently from poles mounted above the portions of the upper arcade whenever performances or public ceremonies were scheduled. Behind the towering cavea rose the magnificent temple of Venus Victrix, perched high upon the summit of the theater itself. Its gleaming Its gleaming columns and triangular pediments overlooked the city, making it appear almost as though the goddess herself watched over every performance held below. The temple elevated the entire complex into something far greater than a place of entertainment. It was simultaneously a monument to Pompey's military victories, a sanctuary dedicated to divine favor, and one of the greatest architectural achievements ever constructed by the Roman Republic. Surrounding the theater stretched spacious colonnades lined with gardens, fountains, statues, and shaded walkways where philosophers debated, politicians held private conversations, and wealthy Romans strolled beneath the shelter of marble columns. The entire complex projected wealth, prestige, and political power reminded every visitor that although Pompey the Great had fallen in Egypt, his legacy still stood proudly, spiritually, in the heart of Rome. Standing at the theater's grand main entrance, beyond the carefully maintained gardens that surrounded the complex, were Brutus and Gaius Cassius Longinus. Cassius was a Roman senator, politician, and general who was the prime instigator to silence Caesar. Cassius was also the brother-in-law of Brutus, another leader of the conspiracy. Cassius was elected as tribune of the plebs in 49 BCE. He opposed Caesar, and eventually he commanded a fleet against him during Caesar's civil war. After Caesar defeated Pompey in the Battle of Pharsalus, Caesar overtook Cassius, forced him to surrender. Cassius, sorry, Gaius Cassius Longinus also came from a very old and major Roman family, gens Cassia, which had been prominent in Rome since the 6th century BCE. Cassius was 43 years old, and he was a somewhat above average height man. Cassius had rather short and dark brown hair, had light hazel-colored eyes, and an ovular face. Cassius wore a high-collared and formal white long-sleeved tunic worn over the toga purilia, which was a large, undyed, white woolen garment with a broader purple look. Cassius, being a patrician man, wore specialized high-backed shoes called the muleus, which was a distinct red leather shoe worn by patricians, fastened with straps and featuring a crescent-shaped ivory or silver ornaments called lunula at the ankle. Brutus remained silent, his eyes fixed upon the busy square before the theater of Pompey. Hundreds of ordinary Romans continued about their business, completely unaware that within the hour the Republic itself might be changed forever. The fountain splashed quietly among the gardens. Merchants called out to the passing customers, and senators slowly drifted toward the Curia, exchanging greetings as though it were any other meeting of the Senate. Cassius noticed the uncertainty lingering upon Brutus's face. He stepped a little closer. "You are still thinking about it." Brutus nodded. "I am." "You still question whether we are right." "I question what comes after." Cassius folded his arms. "What comes after is exactly why we are here." Brutus looked toward him. Cassius continued calmly. Brutus, this has never been about vengeance. I know. It has never been about jealousy. I know. It has never been about settling old scores. Brutus remained silent. Cassius looked directly into his brother-in-law's eyes. This is about Rome. He allowed those words to settle between them before continuing. For nearly 5 centuries, our republic has survived because no single citizen was permitted to place himself above the laws. We elect magistrates, we elect consuls, even extraordinary powers are granted only for emergencies and only for a short time. Cassius nodded slowly. The dictatorship. Exactly. Cassius lowered his voice. Look at what Caesar has become. He has served as consul. Yes. He has served repeatedly as dictator. Yes. He commands the loyalty of countless veterans. Yes. He fills the Senate with men who owe everything to him. Cassius spread his hands. And every year he gathers still more authority. The sounds of the city continued around them. A group of senators climbed the broad staircase toward the theater, while several slaves hurried after them, carrying scrolls and writing tablets. Cassius watched them for a moment before speaking again. Our ancestors expelled the Tarquins because they refused to bow before a king. His voice remained steady. They swore that never again would Rome be ruled by one man. Brutus answered quietly. I know the story. We all know it. Cassius nodded. Why should Caesar be any different? Brutus hesitated. He says he has no desire to be a king. Caesar gave a short, humorless laugh. Words. He pointed toward the city. Did you not remember what happened at the gladiatorial game? I did. 3 times Antony placed the crown before him, and 3 times he refused. Cassius shook his head. No. Brutus frowned. What do you mean? He refused the title. Cassius's eyes narrowed. Not the power. For several moments, Brutus said nothing. Cassius continued. Every honor the Senate offers him, he accepts. Every office, every distinction, every privilege. He took a slow breath. The only thing he refuses is the one title Romans still fear. Brutus lowered his gaze. The title of king. Because he knows the people hate the word. Cassius replied immediately. But remove the name. He gestured toward the Curia. Now what remains? Brutus thought carefully before answering. A monarch in everything but title. Cassius smiled faintly. Precisely. The breeze swept gently through the gardens, causing the nearby cypress trees to sway. Cassius continued walking slowly beside Brutus. There are nearly 60 of us. Brutus looked toward him. Men from every corner of the Senate. Former supporters, former enemies, old friends, political rivals of the Senate, former supporters, former enemies. Oh, hold on. Sorry. I repeated it. I repeated that. Sorry. Let's start that part over. Brutus looked toward him. Men from every corner of the Senate. Former supporters, former enemies, old friends, political rivals. Cassius smiled sadly. Few things unite Romans. But Caesar has accomplished one. Brutus remained thoughtful. He spared many of us. He did. He pardoned men He pardoned men who fought against him. He did. He showed mercy after Barsalas. He did. Cassius nodded without denying any of it. I have never questioned Caesar's clemency. He paused. I question what that clemency purchased. Brutus looked at him curiously. What do you mean? A debt, Cassius answered. When one man possesses the power to pardon every defeated Roman, then every defeated Roman begins owing his life to that one man. He looks toward the Senate. That is not how a republic survives. Brutus stood quietly. Cassius continued in a softer voice. We do not hate Caesar. I certainly do not. Nor do I. See, Cassius's expression remained firm. But affection cannot outweigh duty. He placed a hand upon Brutus's shoulder. When future generations look back upon this day, I do not wish them to remember 60 murderers. His voice becoming almost solemn. I want them to remember 60 Romans who refused to watch their republic disappear without resistance. Brutus looked toward the towering theater of Pompey. The marble columns gleamed beneath the late morning sun. I pray, he said quietly, that history remembers the difference. Cassius followed his gaze. So do I. For a long moment, neither man spoke. The city continued around them, blissfully unaware that before the sun reached its highest point, the fate of the Roman Republic would be decided within the walls of Pompey's great theater. Yeah, hold on, guys. I'm just going to drink a quick glass of water really quickly. Hold on. All right, I'm back, guys. I'm back. Sorry about that. But I'm back. Chapter 16. Cicero. The interior of the theater of Pompey unfolded like a colossal bowl of gleaming travertine, travertine stone and deep red brick. Its immense semicircular cavea, embracing the central orchestra in a sweeping horseshoe that rose more than 100 feet in the open Roman sky. Tier upon tier of pale marble seating climbed steadily upward in perfect geometric order, divided by broad horizontal walkways and radiating staircases that carried spectators toward the summit of the structure. Although no theatrical performance was scheduled that morning, the theater was still anything but deserted. Senators in brilliant white togas, magistrates, attendants, public slaves, lictors, and messengers moved steadily through the lower passageways, crossed the orchestra, and gathered in small groups beneath the towering stage facades. Their conversations rising in a constant murmur that echoed gently throughout the enormous structure. Presiding over the entire theater, the absolute apex of Cavia, stood the magnificent temple of Venus Victrix. Its towering Corinthian columns richly decorated pediment and shadowed portico crowned the summit of the great stone crescents, dominating both the theater and the surrounding city beyond. From below, it appeared almost as though the goddess herself watched over every gathering held within Pompey's monumental complex. Across the polished marble of the orchestra floor, the broad morning shadow cast by the multi-storied scaena fronds stretched slowly westwards, while the brilliantly painted columns, gilded architectural the details, and countless marble statues decorating the immense stage facades glowed beneath the late morning sunlight. Though no actors occupied its celebrated stage, no audience filled the soaring tile tiers of marble seatings, the theater had become a different kind of performance altogether. Roman senators, magistrates, attendants, public slaves, lictors, and messengers crossed the vast orchestra floor in every direction, their conversations blending into a constant murmur that echoed softly throughout the colossal structure, while togas drifted between towering columns like moving sails upon a calm sea, while clerks hurried beneath the brilliant scaena fronds carrying bundles of scrolls and wax tablets from one official to another. Above them all, the magnificent temple of Venus Victrix crowns crowned the summit of the cavea. Its towering Corinthian columns gleamed beneath the late morning sunlight, overlooking the theater as though the goddess herself had descended to witness the affairs of the Republic. The brilliantly painted stage facade stretched across nearly the entire width of the building. Its 3 stories of crimson, emerald, sapphire, and gold-painted columns, framing dozens of marble statues depicting Roman heroes, Olympian gods, poets, generals, and legendary kings. Sunlight poured through the open theater, illuminating drifting particles of dust that shimmered lazily through the air. Julius Caesar walked confidently across the orchestra floor. To either side of him remained Brutus and Cassius, neither man betraying the slightest hint of what rested within his thoughts. Yeah, sorry about that. I got a little lost. Let's continue. Their pace remained measured and dignified, as past senators who respectfully stepped aside To allow the dictator passage. Caesar, good morning, dictator. Welcome. Caesar acknowledged each greeting with a courteous inclination of his head. My thanks. It is good to see you again. The gods continue to favor you. They have been generous. His replies came naturally, calmly. There was not the slightest indication that he sensed danger. As they approached the center of the theater, another figure emerged from among the gathering senators. Unlike many of the younger politicians surrounding him, the newcomer carried himself with the quiet confidence of a man who had spent decades commanding attention not through victories, but through the sheer voice of his intellect and his voice. Marcus Tullius Cicero. A man has fallen into the river in Lagos City. Now start the new rescue helicopter. Hey, build a helicopter. And fly off to the rescue. Okay, that was a stupid joke. That was really stupid. Okay, let's continue. All right, let's continue now. Even among Rome's greatest statesmen, his reputation required no introduction. Cicero was regarded throughout the Republic as one of the finest orators Rome had ever produced. A statesman, lawyer, philosopher, scholar, writer, and master of rhetoric, his speeches had become the standard against which aspiring advocates measured themselves. His extensive writings on philosophy, politics, law, and public speaking had already begun circulating throughout the Republic, studied by senators and young magistrates eager to imitate his elegant prose and persuasive style. So influential had his methods become that generations of Romans would later refer to his distinctive approach simply as Ciceronian rhetoric. Hold on, I think I skipped a sentence. Hold on. A statesman, lawyer, philosopher, scholar, writer, and master of rhetoric, his speeches had become the standard against which aspiring advocates measured themselves. All right, sorry. I missed that sentence. I missed that. His extensive writings on philosophy, politics, law, and public speaking had already begun circulating throughout the Republic, studied by senators and young magistrates, eager to imitate his elegant prose and persuasive style. So influential had his methods become that generations of Romans would later refer to his distinctive approach simply as Ciceronian rhetoric. Unlike many of the ancient aristocratic families dominating Roman politics, Cicero had not been born into one of the Republic's oldest patrician houses. Instead, he hailed from the prosperous municipal town of Arpinium and belonged To the Roman equestrian order, through remarkable talent, relentless studying, and unmatched eloquence, he had risen through the cursus honorum, eventually serving as consul in 63 BCE. His political career, however, had unfolded during one of the most turbulent periods in Roman history. A committed defender of the Republic, Cicero believed deeply in the authority of the Senate, the rule of law, and the constitutional traditions established by Rome's ancestors. It was precisely those convictions that had brought him into repeated disagreements with Julius Caesar. Although he admired Caesar's brilliance as a commander and recognized his extraordinary political ability, Cicero viewed the dictator's ever-growing authority with increasing concern. Caesar's accumulation of offices, honors, and influences struck him as dangerously close to monarchy, a form of government Romans had rejected centuries earlier with the expulsion of their kings. Yet, politics rarely allowed room for simplicity. Following the Civil War, Cicero had supported Pompey. Caesar, however, had chosen mercy over revenge. Rather than executing one of Rome's most celebrated orators, he pardoned him. The act earned Cicero's gratitude. It did not, however, ease their profound political differences. As Cicero approached, Caesar immediately smiled. Cicero, Caesar. The two men clasped forearms in greeting. It pleases me to see you in good health, Cicero said. And you as well. Caesar looked him over briefly. I trust your studies continue uninterrupted. Cicero smiled faintly. A scholar's work is never truly finished. I imagine not. I find there is always another speech to revise, another philosopher to argue with, and professional senator convinced he can outwit logic. Caesar laughed quietly. I do not envy your profession. You command armies. Cicero answered with equal amusement. I merely command impatient audiences. I should think the latter the greater challenge. The remark earned a genuine laugh from several nearby senators. For a brief moment, the atmosphere felt almost light-hearted. Cicero glanced upward toward the towering Scaena fronts. It has been some time since I last stood within Pompey's theater. Caesar followed his gaze. It remains magnificent. It does. Cicero nodded thoughtfully. Pompey always believed monuments outlived men. Caesar smiled. In this case, he looked around the immense theater. He may have been correct. The two men continued, speaking as they slowly crossed the orchestra together, discussing recent provincial affairs, the rebuilding of cities damaged during the Civil War, and the growing demands placed upon Rome's administration. Though their political disagreements remained well known throughout the Republic, neither allowed them to overshadow the civility expected between two of Rome's most distinguished public figures. Behind their courteous conversation, Brutus and Cassius exchanged a brief glance. Without drawing attention to themselves, the two senators gradually slowed their pace, allowing a respectful distance to develop between themselves and Caesar as he continued his discussion with Cicero. Around them, the great rotunda buzzed with activity. Senators debated proposed legislation beneath painted colonnades. Magistrates consulted over official business. Scribes hurried from one gathering to another, with scrolls tucked beneath their arms, and attendants quietly announced the arrival of newly arrived officials. The Republic appeared to function exactly as it always had. Only two men standing within that crowded theater knew how fragile that appearance truly was. Brutus and Cassius gradually drifted away from Caesar's conversations, careful not to make their separation appear deliberate. Neither man spoke for several moments. Instead, they allowed the constant movement of the theater to conceal them as they entered the spacious rotunda, adjoining the main passageways. It was one of the busiest areas within Pompey's immense complex. Senators gathered in loose circles discussing provincial appointments and pending legislation magistrates reviewed reviewed official documents alongside their scribes and public slaves, hurried from one group to another, carrying wax tablets, scrolls, and sealed correspondence. Beneath the towering marble columns, philosophers quietly debated points of law, while wealthy equestrians greeted political allies they had not seen in months. The countless conversations blended into a steady hum that echoed softly beneath the vaulted ceiling, creating the perfect cover for two men wishing to speak without attracting undue attention. Cassius casually clasped his hands behind his back as though simply admiring the architecture. Brutus remained beside him. His eyes briefly wandered across the rotunda before settling once more behind Caesar and Cicero, who continued their discussion only a short distance away. Brutus spoke. Cicero. Cassius nodded. I saw. I was not expecting him. Nor was I. Brutus watched the celebrated orator for another moment. He has impeccable timing. Cassius allowed himself a faint smile. He usually does. The smile quickly disappeared. Brutus lowered his voice. Does his presence concern you? Cassius did not answer immediately. Instead, he surveyed the rotunda, ensuring no one had wandered within earshot. Only after satisfying himself did he respond. A little. Brutus looked toward him. A little? Cicero was never part of this. No, he knows nothing. No, he cannot know. Brutus nodded slowly. I agree. The two men fell silent once more. Nearby, a pair of senators began debating grain shipments from Sicily, their animated discussion drawing the attention of several others. Elsewhere, a group of young magistrates laughed over some political anecdote while an elderly clerk struggled beneath an enormous stack of scrolls. Everything appeared perfectly normal. Brutus quietly exhaled. I have always respected Cicero. As have I. He is one of the finest minds Rome has produced. Cassius glanced toward the famous orator. No one questions that. He genuinely wishes to preserve the Republic. I believe he does. Brutus frowned. Then why? He hesitated. Why was he never brought into our confidence? Cassius answered almost immediately. Because Cicero is a man of words. Brutus raised an eyebrow. And we are not? We have exhausted words. Cassius's tone remained. Cicero believes every crisis can be solved by another speech before the Senate. He has persuaded Rome before. He has. Cassius nodded. And I would gladly hear him speak for another 10 years. He looks directly at Brutus. But speeches cannot undo what Caesar has already become. Brutus remains thoughtful. Cicero despises tyranny. He does. He fears monarchy. He does. He has never hidden either opinion. Cassius folded his arms. Nor have we. Brutus glanced once more towards Caesar. The dictator and Cicero were still conversing pleasantly beneath the towering columns of the Sciana fronds. Their discussion appeared entirely cordial, punctuated now and then by polite smiles and the occasional quiet laugh. It almost seems wrong, Brutus admitted. Cassius looked up at him. What does? That Cicero should stand only a few yards away. Brutus paused, without the slightest knowledge of what this day will become. Cassius followed Brutus's gaze. He is not the only one. The remark lingered heavily between them. Around them, dozens of senators continued their conversations, completely unaware that history itself was quietly approaching. Brutus spoke again. If you were to discover our intentions now... Cassius interrupted him. He will not. You cannot know that. I know enough. Cassius's voice remained firm but controlled. Cicero came here expecting the meeting of the Senate. So did everyone else. That expectation remains our greatest ally. Brutus, consider the words. Cassius stepped slightly closer, lowering his voice even further. Listen to me carefully. Brutus met his eyes. The plan has unfolded exactly as we hoped. Caesar came. Yes, he suspects nothing. No. The Senate is assembled? Yes. No guard stands between him and the Curia? Brutus slowly nodded. Cicero? Cassius briefly looks toward the elderly statesman once more. Cicero is exactly where he should be. He is speaking with Caesar, as any senator might. There's nothing unusual about it. Brutus remains unconvinced. Cassius placed a reassuring hand upon his shoulder. Do not search for dangers where none exist. His expression hardened. We have spent months preparing for this morning. Every conversation, every meeting, every oath, every detail. He glanced across the bustling rotunda. Cannot allow ourselves to lose confidence now simply because one respected senator has arrived. Brutus lowered his eyes. You are right. I know. See, Cassius's voice softened. Our purpose has not changed. He looked once more toward Caesar. Nor has Caesar. The murmur of the rotunda continued around them, as constant and ordinary as the flow of water as the flow of water from the nearby fountains. Senators laughed, clerks hurried toward the crowd, messengers came and went beneath the painted colonnades. Nothing about the scene suggested that the Republic stood only months from one of the most consequential acts in history. Cassius straightened the folds of his toga. Come. Brutus looked up. It is time. He gave one final glance towards Cicero before nodding. Together, the two conspirators stepped back into the moving crowd. And quietly made their way towards Caesar once again. Their expressions composed, their pace unhurried, and their resolve unbroken. Chapter 17. Petition. Alright, sorry. Sorry about that. I got a little lost. Let's continue. The steady murmur filling the rotunda continued uninterrupted. Groups of senators gradually began dispersing toward their assigned seats as attendants quietly announced that the meeting of the Senate would soon commence. Public slaves hurried through the corridors carrying bundles of official scrolls beneath their arms, while lictors directed late arriving magistrates toward the Curia. The lively political discussions filled the theater of Pompey only moments before slowly gave way to the more orderly rhythm expected before an official session of Rome's governing body. Across the rotunda, Cicero concluded his conversation with Cicero concluded his conversation with Caesar. It would appear, Caesar said with a courteous smile. Cicero said with a courteous smile, that the Senate grows impatient. Caesar glanced toward the increasing movement of senators entering the Curia. It usually does. Cicero chuckled quietly, especially when politics threatens to delay a luncheon. That earned another brief smile from Caesar. I suspect today's discussions shall prove spirited. They usually are. For a brief moment, the two men regarded one another in silence. Though they stood upon the opposite sides of Rome's political divide, they remained a mutual respect born of years spent navigating the Republic's often turbulent affairs. Cicero extended his hand. Until the meeting concludes. Cicero clasped it firmly. Until then. The famous orator inclined his head respectfully before turning away. His white toga disappeared into the growing stream of senators making their way toward their seats, completely unaware that the ordinary Senate meeting he expected would never truly begin. Only after Cicero had disappeared into the crowd did Brutus and Cassius quietly approach once more. Caesar noticed them immediately. There you are. We do not wish to interrupt your conversation, Brutus replied. A wise decision, Caesar. Caesar adjusted the folds of his toga. Cicero has never lacked for words. Cassius smiled politely. That is perhaps the greatest understatement ever spoken. Caesar laughed. I'll grant you that. Before either man could continue the conversation, another senator approached at a brisk pace. Caesar, the newcomer bowed respectfully. He was Lucius Tullius Cimber, a capable Roman politician whose fortunes had risen considerably under Caesar's government. Cimber had served as praetor during the previous year and had recently been appointed governor of the prosperous province of Bithynia and Pontus in Asia Minor for the coming year. His steady advancement through Rome's highest offices reflected the considerable confidence Caesar had placed in his administrative abilities and political judgment. Caesar greeted him warmly. Cimber, dictator, I trust preparations for your governorship proceed well. They do, Cimber nodded respectfully. I remain deeply grateful for your confidence. You have earned it. I hope to justify that confidence. I believe you shall. For a moment, the conversation appeared entirely ordinary. Brutus subtly glanced toward Cassius. Cassius returned the briefest of nods. The moment had arrived. Cimber drew a slow breath. There is, however, one matter that I hoped to place before you. Caesar's expressions remained pleasant. Oh, it concerns my brother, Publius Tilius Cimber. Publius Tilius Cimber. Oh, sorry, Alex, I misplaced the apostrophe, sorry. The name meant little to most of the senators passing nearby. Caesar, however, knew it immediately. My brother remains in exile. Cimber spoke carefully. I have come to ask whether you might consider the decree. His voice carried genuine emotion. I ask not as governor, not nor as praetor, but simply as a brother. Several nearby senators slowly slowed their pace, curious enough to listen without appearing intrusive. Caesar remains composed. I know why you ask. I had hoped you might. Caesar lowered his head slightly. My brother has suffered greatly. He has. And surely enough, time has now passed. Caesar folded his hands before him. The matter was not decided lightly. I know. I ask only that you show him the same clemency you have shown so many others. Caesar regarded him thoughtfully. Around them, the movement toward the Senate chamber continued uninterrupted. Brutus quietly stepped backwards. So shall we? He asked softly toward Cassius. Cassius answered just loudly enough to be heard. Yes, the meeting is about to begin. Without attracting attention, the two conspirators gradually withdrew from Caesar and Cimber's discussion. To every observer nearby, it appeared they were merely making their way toward the Senate seating before proceedings officially commenced. Neither hurried, neither looked back. They simply blended into the steady processions of senators moving through the theater. After several paces, Brutus quietly glanced over his shoulder. Caesar remained exactly where he had been. Listening, patient, calm, completely unsuspecting. Cimber continued speaking. I ask only that you reconsider. My brother has paid dearly. I understand your concern, Caesar replied. I truly do. His tone remained gentle, measured, but my decision stands. Cimber remained silent. Caesar placed a reassuring hand upon his shoulder. Not today. There was no anger in his voice, no irritation, only quiet finality. The Senate waits. Senate waits. He offers a sympathetic smile. When today's business has concluded, we may speak again if you wish. Cimber bowed his head. As you command. Caesar nodded once. For now. He gestured toward the entrance leading into the Chorea. Take your seats. The session is about to begin. Cimber respectfully stepped aside. Very well. Thank you for hearing me. Caesar acknowledged him with another nod before beginning to walk toward the Senate chamber. Several yards away, partially concealed among the steadily moving senators, Brutus and Cassius watched the exchange conclude. It went exactly as expected, Cassius murmured, without turning his head. Brutus kept his eyes fixed upon Caesar. Yes, petition was refused. As it always would have been. Cassius's expression remained unreadable. The first step is complete. The two men slowly resumed walking with the rest of the senators. Around them, the magnificent theater of Pompey remained filled with ordinary conversation, the rustling of togas, echoing footsteps, and the quiet anticipation that preceded every meeting of the Roman Senate. To everyone else present, Lucius Tullius Cimber's request had been nothing more than a disappointed brother pleading for mercy. Only the conspirators understood its true purpose. The petition had never been intended to succeed. It had only needed to bring Caesar precisely where they wanted him. Now there remains only one final act. Chapter 18. The assassination of Julius Caesar. For one fleeting moment, everything remained perfectly ordinary. The senators continued filing toward the Curia. The murmur of conversation still echoed beneath the painted vaults of Pompey's magnificent theater. Public slaves carried bundles of wax, tablets between magistrates, while attendants quietly ushered late arrivals toward the Senate chamber. Julius Caesar had already begun walking away from Lucius Tullius Cimber. His petition had been heard. His request had been declined. The dictator adjusted the folds of his toga and took only a few more steps before footsteps rapidly approaching behind him. Before hearing footsteps rapidly approaching behind him. He turned. Cimber had returned. My apologies, Caesar, Cimber said respectfully. I ask only one final time. Caesar sighed patiently. Cimber. Before he could continue, another senator appeared. Then another. Casca, but also military commander and politician Gaius Trebonius, as well as Decius Brutus, lingered farther away. Within moments, nearly a dozen senators had gathered around the dictator. The conversations throughout the rotunda continued uninterrupted. To everyone else, it appeared that several senators merely wished to speak with Caesar before the session commenced. Caesar looked from one face to another. His expression remained calm. Now, there will be time for discussion once the Senate is seated. No one answered. Lucius Tullius Cimber stepped closer. Please, Caesar, my brother, I have already rendered my current decision. Caesar's tone remained courteous. It shall not be changed today. Cimber suddenly reached forwards. His hands grasped the shoulder of Caesar's toga. Not violently, just firmly enough to halt him. Caesar's expression changed immediately. His brows narrowed. Cimber, he calmly pulled against the fabric. What are you doing? Still, no one answered. Hold on, I think I missed a few sentences. His hands grasped the shoulder of Caesar. Hold on. Cimber suddenly reached forward. His hands grasped the shoulder of Caesar's toga. Not violently, just firmly, enough to halt him. Caesar's expression changed immediately. His brows narrowed. Cimber, he calmly pulled against the fabric. What are you doing? Still no one answered. The air itself seemed to freeze. Several nearby senators looked toward the gathering with mild curiosity. Brutus stopped walking. Cassius looked once toward him. Only once. Then with a voice loud enough for every conspirator surrounding Caesar to hear. Now! The single word shattered the ordinary rhythm of the morning. The conspirators surged forwards. Tables overturned as startled clerks stumbled backwards, scattering wax tablets and scrolls across the marble floor. A bronze oil lamp crashed to the ground, ringing sharply through the rotunda. Senators instinctively recoiled in confusion, while attendants shouted in alarm, unsure whether they were witnessing an argument or something far worse. Caesar... sorry. Sorry about that. Sorry. Or something far worse. Caesar instinctively stepped backward. What is this? His voice remained commanding. Cassius? His eyes darted toward another familiar face. Brutus? Then another figure rushed through the confusion. Casca. Caesar's eyes widened. Casca? The question carried genuine disbelief. You? He looked around. The circle had closed. Every direction was blocked by men he knew, men he had promoted, men he had pardoned, men he had trusted. For the first time that morning, uncertainty crossed his face. He slowly raised both hands. If there is some grievance, his voice remains composed despite the growing chaos. Then let us speak as Romans. No answer. I have heard petitions all morning. Still nothing. If offices are desired, he looks toward Cassius. They may be granted. If lands are sought, his gaze shifted toward Cimber. They may be allotted. If debts burden any among you, he spread his hands. They can be forgiven. His breathing grew heavier. If wealth is needed, I possess enough for every man standing here. His eyes searched each face desperately. Villas, estates, appointments, governorships, whatever injustice you believe has been done. His voice rose. It can be corrected. Another step backward. There is no quarrel that requires blood. For the briefest instant, no one moved. Then Casca lunged. Steel flashed beneath the morning light. The first blade struck. Caesar cried out more in astonishment than pain as the dagger glanced across his shoulder. Casca! The shouts echoed throughout the theater. What madness is this? That single strike unleashed everything. The remaining conspirators surged forward. Blades rose and fell in frantic succession. Caesar instinctively struggled, pushing one attacker aside before another closed the distance. He seized his arm, twisted free from another blow. He seized an arm, twisted free from another blow, and stumbled backward into an overturned table that collapsed beneath his weight. Scrolls scattered across the marble floor. Another dagger struck, then another. Voices filled the rotunda. For the Republic! Strike! Do not hesitate! The once orderly Senate dissolved into complete panic. Some senators and other attendees fled, while others stood frozen in horror. Public slaves screamed as they rushed toward the exits. The polished marble floor became littered with shattered furniture, scattered documents, overturned benches, and discarded writing tablets. Caesar's white toga quickly darkened. Still, he fought to remain standing. Still, he searched the faces surrounding him. Disbelief slowly gave way to sorrow. One by one, he recognized them. Cassius, Cimber, Decimus, Casca. men whose careers he had advanced, men whose lives he had spared. Then the crowds parted slightly. Brutus stepped forward. He alone had not raised his dagger. For a heartbeat, neither man moved. Caesar stared at him, his voice becoming more ragged. Blood stained the fold of his toga. His voice was scarcely more than a whisper. You too, Brutus? Brutus closed his eyes, only briefly. When they opened again, the hesitation was gone. His hand tightened around the dagger. For Rome! The blade strode forward. Caesar staggered. His strength finally abandoned him. He looked once more at Brutus, not with anger, not with hatred, but with immeasurable disappointment. Brutus, Brutus slowly withdrew the blade. His voice trembled despite every effort to steady it. Then he swallowed. Wait, hold on. Sorry, hold on. Brutus slowly withdrew the blade. His voice trembled despite every effort to steady it. Then he swallowed. Then fall, Caesar. The dictator's knees buckled. His body collapsed heavily onto the polished marble beneath the towering columns of Pompey's theater. Around him, the rotunda fell into stunned silence. The most powerful man in the Roman world lay motionless, and with him, the Roman Republic crossed the threshold from which it could never truly return.